Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 101 in the series. Welcome. Welcome back to the yarn room. Welcome back to Urbana, Illinois, where I'm coming to you from. It is a rainy Sunday here, but it is the end of the semester, so there's a lot of weight being just lifted. You can probably tell I'm like floating in here, basically. I have grading left to do, but my students are all turning in some really fun creative projects that they got to design themselves, so it should be really pretty epic. It should be a pretty epic week next week when I get to my grading. What else do I usually tell you? You can find me just about everywhere as Knitting the Stash, and that's here, obviously on YouTube, on Ravelry, on Instagram, on the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. And sometimes I get questions about where the show notes are if you are looking for a link to something that I talk about on here, and they're always over on the blog page. I put up a separate episode page for each episode, so if you search Knitting the Stash, WordPress, .com, and then you put in episode 101, you'll find the show notes for this episode. Yay! It's funny, I toyed around with the idea of not numbering these episodes. Once I got to 100, I was like, who needs numbers anymore? But I do think it kind of helps find different episodes and kind of keep everything in order. So I think I'll keep doing it, but if you have opinions on that kind of thing, I'd love to know. I'm sorry I missed you guys last week. I put up a tutorial instead about the button bands on this sweater. So if you had a chance to watch that, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have suggestions for future tutorial videos, I love hearing them. I've gotten a couple of really nice messages from folks who are kind of have found the podcast and are interested in tutorials, and I love hearing what you want to see. So let me know what the latest is. What are some of the things you're confused about, or you're knitting, or you're wanting help with, and I can try to put up a tutorial that way. That's often the inspiration for those tutorials, so keep the messages coming. And if you're new to the podcast, I guess I should say welcome. This is a podcast, as you might have surmised, about design and garment modification primarily, but I do a little bit of everything in here, so a little spinning, a little shawl making. Sometimes Spencer comes on, as is today. He's going to come on. Spencer's my husband, and he's kind of hilarious, and we have a little chat. So yeah, without further ado, I should tell you what we're going to do today. Spencer is coming on the cast. We're going to talk about like creative blocks, when you get stuck creatively. So that should be kind of fun. I have my completed Reverb sweater, which is by Tanis Levelet of Tanis Fiber Arts, and it was put out in Brooklyn Tweed's Wool People back in the day. And so I'll talk to you about the modifications on that one. I also have a test knit call for one of the patterns for Shorn III. Lori Lamont designed a beautiful hat, and we're looking for test knitters now, so we'll talk about that. And I have the giveaway winners for the 100th episode yarn extravaganza giveaway. So we'll talk about those at the end. And a note, you guys often ask what I'm wearing. This is Vary the Gate, and it is by Casapinka, and it's knit in Pearl and Ply. Sadly, Pearl and Ply is not dying anymore. Right now, at least, they're on a little hiatus, but I had a couple skeins of their yarn back when I did a review for them, and it's just gorgeous stuff. I really love their colorways, so I hope they come back sometime soon. But Casapinka is, if you guys are on her mailing list, she sent out a little coupon code today, so you can pick up one of her patterns if you're on that list. And I thought it was kind of fitting that, like, this morning when I woke up and pulled this on, then I find Casapinka, and it's the Vary the Gate, and anyway, it was just like, it was Kismet, it was meant to be. So yeah, Casapinka is cool. If you haven't checked out her designs, she is excellent at working with variegated yarns. So if you have a lot of those one-off skeins in your collection and you're like, what do I do with them? I really want to knit with one of them. She is a great designer for that, because she'll have one-off shawls, or she has some beautiful sweaters too, hats, cowls, things that really play with variegated yarn, like Vary the Gate, so that, you take a variegated yarn, such as this one, and you end up with a really, you don't end up with color pooling, you end up with some really interesting stitches and some texture, and the color for the variegation kind of does what it's supposed to do. So Casapinka, check her out. All right, I'm going to send us over to this segment with Spencer, and we'll come back and talk about this finished object. Okay, so Spencer is on the cast as promised. This is like, crowdsourced, polled. Like,
there was an election?
Everybody wanted Spencer to come back.
Did you have to redistrict or anything? Or
there was a lot of,
There was some rigged election
he's back.
stuff.
And our topic for today is
blockage. Sounds intestinal, but it's actually a creative process.
Oh my god. We're going to talk about what happens
when nothing happens.
Yeah,
you know?
That's good. What happens when nothing happens. I like that.
Like you have like a steady stream of projects going on, and then suddenly you don't have a steady stream of projects because something's up.
Yeah.
And I think we were sort of breaking it into different categories or
yeah.
reasons or something.
Yeah. Because it seems like there are different reasons. Like right now, I feel like I'm in it's a creative slump. Maybe not blockage.
You're in a slump.
Creative slump.
Okay, all right.
Let's
That's
talk
good.
about that. Slump is a little better.
Yeah.
It's like, so, like for me right now, I mean, I feel like I walk in the yarn room and it's like there's so much stuff in here. There's books to be inspiring. There's like yarn. There's spinning wheels. There's like tons of different things. But I'm on my Ravelry page and I'm looking, and I just can't seem to like find the thing that I really want.
So that's why you went back to the blanket.
Oh, the blanket.
She went back to the blanket. She always
the blanket.
I think you always have this process where you do a sweater, you do a new pattern, you launch something, shave a sheep, whatever it is, and then she'll kind of fall back to a blanket, knit that for a little while, and then get into the next sweater or something.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a palette cleanser. We talked about this. I talked about this in another podcast.
The blanket's a palette cleanser?
No, like a shawl will be like a palette cleanser. Like
okay.
You need to kind of do something that's kind of like whatever to get onto the next thing. But the blanket isn't a palette cleanser. It's the slump knitting. It's knitting. I don't know what else to do right now, but I really need to be knitting. Like my hands need to be doing something.
And what's that about? Can you just take a few months off or whatever?
No.
You gotta be knitting.
So it's like my hands.
Never
I don't know.
Knitting.
I don't know what they would do without like something to do. Like even right now, I'm just sitting here a little bit like.
You don't ever knit on the podcast?
No, I don't. It's weird, but I don't.
Weird.
No.
You can't focus enough.
I could. I mean, I knit all the time when I do other stuff, but. Usually I got my hands...
Look for it next time. Episode 197.
Right.
Knitting
usually
on
I have my hands on other things, like I'm showing sweaters or I'm, doing other things. So,
wrangling dogs.
Right, yeah, the dogs are in the room right now.
Alright, so you got slump knitting.
Yeah.
But what's the cause of the slump?
I feel like sometimes it's that embarrassment of riches kind of thing. Like there's so much there.
So much yarn.
So much yarn.
Like in this room that used to be like a bedroom or whatever, and now it's the yarn room.
But like,
so you're overwhelmed by too many.
Maybe it's like you're overwhelmed. Like I've told you sometimes. Hi, Millie. Sometimes you like open the refrigerator and there's like all the food and you're just like, I don't know what to cook. It's like there's too much. If you had just one skein or just a couple things.
You always go with the burrito at that point. It's just,
well, that's the blanket. That's the
okay.
It's like you grab the frozen burrito, which is the blanket. What about you though? Like when you get stuck.
I definitely slump out. I find sometimes, like right now, I feel like I'm busy with other stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm busy doing like work that is, more ready-made and easily sort of done or something like that.
Like you have it's like you got a to-do list.
It's like the day job.
The
day job is just taking more time. So I'm in the workshop and I realize like, whoa, I haven't really been in here doing creative stuff lately.
Yeah.
So partly it's just that. Sometimes the materials, I think, like your materials really have to speak to you. So like I'll be out there and if I've got things in front of me that are just kind of calling my name,
right,
I'll jump on that project.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of like if you have a setup, like I've got my blanket. If you have something in the background, like kind of going on that you could just kind of pick up and do until you can figure out what else to do, then you're...
Yeah, a little slump knitting. Slump building, whatever.
Knitting. But sometimes, like you were saying, the materials, like I'm looking through Ravelry, just like pouring through Ravelry, going through my books, like trying to think of something, and like, nothing is quite right. It's like, that's kind of the problem right now, is like, do I want to learn something new? Do I want to... work on a particular designer? Do I want to use a particular yarn? Like what's
You've got high standards.
What's the motivator? Because sometimes that's the thing. It's like
so you're looking for just the right thing instead of just anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So Millie's interrupting us right now because she needs a little bit of extra love.
What's going on, Millie?
So I guess the question is like, do you have suggestions for getting out of a creative slump?
Getting out of a creative slump. I think you got to immerse yourself in your space, like wherever you do stuff. The other thing...
Wait, I've been feeling like coming in the yarn room and just kind of like hanging out, which is part of this whole thing.
She's into that.
Well, just come into your space and like maybe pull the yarn out and like set it on the table or like, look through the skeins or whatever.
I would recommend kind of rolling it out on the floor and just kind of walking on it, kind of like hot coals. You just walk across that stuff.
See what happens. Which one you fall on, twist your ankle on.
Here's another one. A lot of people use this. I do this. I don't know if you do this.
Uh-oh. This could be interesting.
I don't think she does this. You got to get to your journal. You got to do your journaling, you know? Crack open your creative, whatever it is, journal.
Yeah.
Sketch things, make lists, draw things out.
See, that's why it's good you're on here, because I don't do that kind of stuff.
You don't journal.
Well, I'll wake up in the middle of the night with like an idea for a sweater and just try to draw it real quick or something.
All right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But and I
What
have a
about
little
just
book.
opening up
I have a little book that I keep my
open it
ideas
up
in
and then just start free associating. But the journal can be good.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Also just making like regular time for things.
Yeah. But I also think like you know, just sometimes, like for me it would be like swatching or just doing something else, like some other creative pursuit. Like, you know, maybe it's like baking. For me, sometimes I just really want to go, I'm like, I'm stuck knitting. I'll go make like 5 cakes.
Like go out in the workshop and just straighten everything up or whatever.
Yeah, you do that a lot. You just like,
I was thinking you could do that.
You do disappear to the workshop quite a bit and you're just kind of like futzing around.
She loves it.
Cleaning it all up and getting it all
sometimes.
organized. So sometimes it's like that kind of thing.
All right, now, and the flip side of this, I guess, is to ask yourself why it matters if you're in a slump. You know, like maybe you could just sort of chill out and ride the slump, ride it out and just sort of let it go. Or maybe you need to be uber productive, creative all the time.
I always think about back to like academic stuff, but my day job, like when I was between the last 2 books, I was panicking. Because I was just like, I'm not creative enough, I don't have any more ideas, I'm burned out, like what am I going to do?
Well, you guys are on a expected productivity
but
schedule.
I had a nice conversation with my advisor and she was just like, sometimes you've got to take like, you know, a period of time and just let everything just like, it's like letting the farm fields be fallow, kind of like, you just got to like let it ride a little bit. Because in letting it ride, you're not just not being productive, you're also like, you know, letting creativity, I feel like creativity kind of builds up. Yeah. Like over time, and you're just kind of like, well, I really want to make something, like... Okay, maybe that's
sounds
just me.
more like cannibalism to me, I don't know, you know.
Maybe that's just me.
What about, do you guys use idea boards?
A lot of people use like mood boards.
Mood boards, whatever they are. You go to Pinterest, pin a bunch of things on a topic, and you get some ideas.
I've been taking screenshots of things that I like or that inspire me, and then just keeping them as background art on my computer desktop, so that then it's
That's pretty sweet.
You know, I can see colors together, or I can see yarns that really are cool to me, or whatever it is.
Does Ravelry work that way? Like if you're on Ravelry, you just get inspired
I don't know. The patterns are kind of... Yeah, it depends on where you're at.
You can see some pictures of some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
It seems like Ravelry is a place where like a lot of people coalesce around certain patterns, but other things, like sometimes I'll see a really cool looking object and I'll go there and it doesn't look like anyone's been knitting it. Like it's sort of hidden in the... Yeah,
it's one of my favorite things to find, is like to find those patterns that are really cool, and then you're like one of the only people knitting them, and then you can introduce people to them.
Yours are usually in like Lithuanian or something.
Yeah, if they're in another language, it's even better.
Yeah.
There was a pair of Russian underwear.
Look
for it on Ravelry. It's the patterns in Russian.
That was a nice
and
pair
I'm
of underwear.
so tempted because it's a really interesting construction. If you're thinking about knitting leggings, or if you're thinking about knitting for other parts of the body than the parts of the body we always knit for, which is like, you know, sweaters or shawls or hats or mittens.
They are sexy as hell, I'll tell you.
They're cool. See, I should go knit the Russian underwear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Do something different.
Yeah. So anyway, that's our thoughts on creativity and the slump. It happens to everybody. You're not alone if you're slumping.
Slumped out. Yeah. So what else is the podcast about today? Your sweater?
Sweater.
The big sweater?
Giveaway.
I like that sweater.
Knit. You get all kinds of stuff.
Giveaway. You're test knitting?
No,
you get people.
Well, I am test knitting for Laurie's patterns, but other people are going to test knit too, hopefully.
But I hope you guys like that blue sweater. I thought it was pretty sweet. It's got like a little chunk to it.
It's a good sweater.
It's a good sweater. I like it.
Now he wants another one, I'm sure.
I could use one of those sweaters.
Really?
I'll wear it. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, maybe you'll see it on the future.
It's a cool sweater.
Thanks for coming on today.
All right. Good luck out there in the knitting world.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that segment with Spencer. It's always fun to have him come on the cast and give a little bit of his wisdom about creativity, and we get a little banter. And anyway, it's always fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So shall we move on to finished object for the day? This is, as I said, the Reverb Cardigan by Tanis Levelet of Tanis Fiber Arts. And I think I mentioned on the last cast when I talked about just the upper yoke portion of this sweater, this was in my favorites queue on Ravelry for a very long time. I think it was, I looked, and it was the second sweater I ever favorited. So it kind of fits with our Out of My League make-along that we're doing this season, this year, because I think back in the day when I first saw this pattern, I might have thought to myself, wow, that's a little bit complicated. I don't know if I can swing it. So it's done. So we'll call it another one of another object for the out of my league make-along. Why not? And I hope you guys are working on your projects. I've seen the FO thread over on our Ravelry group kind of like growing, and there's a lot of people adding wonderful, beautiful projects over there, and I just want to congratulate you all for like sticking it out and going back to those projects and fixing them and finishing them, and it's awesome. So it's really great to see. Okay, so this was one of mine, and the Reverb Cardigan is knit from the top down. It is a cabled cardigan. It is knit in Brooklyn tweed shelter, which is what I ended up using for the pattern. I really like these woolen yarns. They don't wear as well as worsted yarns. Let's just be frank about that right up front. I have a couple of woolen sweaters that are wonderful because they are so light, and they feel like you're not even wearing, it's just like a little cloud of something, but they're super warm. Wonderful for those reasons. But I do find that the sweaters I wear a lot get a little bit of the, a lot of the pilling kind of all over the sweater, especially in the, places where you get a lot of friction, so like armpits, and like, if you're sitting with your back against something. So I'm curious to see how this will wear. One of the nice things is having all of the texture on here will disguise, and because the yarn has a little bit of tweediness to it, that should disguise a little bit of the pilling. And you could take your sweater shaver to it. I have mine over here. This is the one I use. It's the Gleaner. So this is like a nice little package. It's gonna make some noise. But this guy is really great for, you can see I've still got some fuzz stuck on there. This guy's really great for, if you're very careful, kind of getting some of those pills off the sweaters. You have to be careful about which attachment you put on and how you use it, and all those things. So make sure that you're not ruining your sweaters when you're trying to help them. But something to think about with woolen spun yarn. And woolen spun yarn, unlike worsted yarn where all of the fibers are aligned and going in the same direction, a woolen spun is a little bit more like, woo, like it traps the air a little bit better. The fibers aren't aligned, so the air can kind of get trapped better. And it makes for a lighter yarn, but then it's not as strong. And you'll also get pilling with worsted spun yarn if it's like 100% merino. There's so much to talk about here with pilling and with how yarns wear, and we should probably do a whole episode on that. So I will stop there. It's a woolen yarn, so just keep that in mind. So this sweater, as you've seen before, has a beautiful cable panel all the way down the back and 2 cable panels on either side of the front. And if you watched the tutorial, you saw how I attached the button bands, which are these pretty wide, let's say 2.5 inch button bands on the front are attached. They're knit vertically and then attached with mattress stitch. So if you're interested in that actual process, you can watch the tutorial. So there are a couple things about this sweater that I modified, of course, and I talked to you guys about the first modification on the last cast, or a couple episodes ago. I'll put it in the show notes, where I added this collar liner to the sweater. And I do that with almost all my sweaters that have high collars, just because there are a bunch of different reasons. One is that it stiffens up the fabric and helps the collar kind of sit up, and you can see that that's working on this sweater. The part in the front that doesn't, the button band that doesn't have that, is a little bit more floppy, whereas this part in the back is very, it's much stiffer and it's not gonna flop down. So I like to have my necks up because it keeps me warmer, and that's one of the ways that I do it. The other is that if I'm using a yarn that I'm concerned might be a little sketchy on the back of my neck, I like to use a liner of a yarn that's like a superwash or something that's super soft and not irritating it in any kind of way for the liner. Now, this is not to say, it's like a whole aside, I don't think wool itself is all that itchy. I'm very comfortable wearing a lot of wool around my head and neck and face, and that's not a problem, but if I'm wearing a sweater that's constantly kind of like sitting on the back of my neck where it is just skin on wool, sometimes it's more comfortable to have a little bit of a layer right there. Plus it's warmer. So there's just 10 different reasons why I put a liner in my sweater collars. But that was the first modification, and if you want to hear more about how I did that, I'll send you over to that other episode of the podcast. The other big modification I did was gauge, and I talked a little bit about that on the first episode as well. My gauge was coming out to 17 stitches per inch per 4 inches rather than 20, and so I initially thought that I needed to go down a couple of sweater sizes because those numbers were going to work out. And as I was knitting the cable part, I realized that because the cables are going to pull everything in, I ended up going back to my normal size at my 17 stitches per 4 inch gauge. And this actually fits perfectly. So it was one of those things where it's like, is this going to work out? I hope so. Yes, it did. So whew, yeah, that was good. Another major modification is that at the bottom of this sweater, you move from the cable panel, all the cable panels, into 2x2 rib. That's what the pattern calls for. And I did that to begin with, and I took one look at it and I thought, oof, why? Why do that? Because what happens is all of your cabling gets kind of distorted and forced into this 2x2 rib. So, you know, maybe the 2x2 rib will line up with this cable, but it wouldn't line up with this cable. And so it just ends up looking like a little bit of a mishmash at the bottom of the sweater, especially after you've done all this work on this cable panel. So I decided to modify and I invented my own pattern for the ribbing at the bottom of the sweater that would mimic these cable patterns as they came down. So to do that, I began in the front, because this is, you know, you're knitting back and forth, knitting and purling, because it's in the flat. And you have to kind of imagine that these button bands aren't here because that's going to confuse things. So you have a certain number of stitches on your needles. You know that by and large, you want your ribbing to be a 2x2-ish kind of ribbing. And the main part where that's going to matter is over here on the sides where you have a lot of plain stockinette. That's where your 2x2 ribbing is just going to be 2x2 ribbing. But you have to make sure that you have the right number of stitches for what you're going to do. So I did a little math ahead of time. I counted up the total number of stitches. So I looked at each of these cables and I thought about how I was going to bring them down into the rib. And for some of them, like these guys, which are a 2x2 cable, I brought them down into a rib that's 2x2. And for these cables right here that are traveling cables and they're just 1-stitch cables, I brought them down into a 1x1 rib. Now, the first thing you might be thinking is, won't that mess up the ribbing? Not really, because as long as you have some ribbing going on, it's not going to really distort the sweater all that much. And what it's going to give you, the trade-off, is that you get this beautiful seamless move from your cabling down into your ribbing, which I think is just so worth it. So then I counted up, you know, the number of stitches I had between the panels over here and made sure that it was divisible by 4, not by 2, but by 4, right? Because you're trying to do a 2x2 rib. So this, I think I had to decrease by 1, you know, knit 2 together toward the end here, something like that. And then on the back panel, I did the same kind of a thing. So you can see that the cabling goes down into the ribbing. And again, the little single cables go down into single ribs and the double cables go down into double ribs, right? And that also preserves this side stitch here that's separating the panel from the stockinette. Same thing. Came around the front or the side, did the same thing on that side, and then the other front panel also have the 2x2 going into the 2x2 ribbing and the 1x1 going into the 1. So yeah, it takes a little bit of planning. It takes a little bit of math and a little bit of, you know, forethought and thinking about how you want it to look, but I really do like the way that looks. And my inspiration for this is that I've actually knit a lot of patterns, especially things like Isabel Kramer's sweaters, where it's, you know, beautifully done in that the cables all go down into the rib in like this really seamless way, and they kind of almost like organically emerge from the rib if you're, anyway, I really like it. I've been inspired by other designs where that was a consideration. So that's the only thing I'd really truly modify about this pattern is, yeah, having those cables come down into the rib in that kind of way. And then the last big modification I did was to reverse the button bands, actually. And I talk about this on the tutorial a little bit. When I was knitting the button bands, I didn't really like the edge that was supposed to be the finished edge in the pattern just didn't look finished to me. But once I turned it upside down and applied it to the other side, I was like, oh, I like that. So I pretty much ended up inverting the button band and the buttonhole band in terms of the instructions on the pattern. But I also made sure that I had an extra, that the stitches were such that I had 2 knit stitches on the side that was going to be seamed, so that I'd have a selvedge stitch over here to add to join to the other 2 knit stitches. So that's why this band is about 3 knit stitches and the others are 2 by 2. If you want to know a little bit more about that, you can watch the tutorial because I talk about it in a little bit more depth. So this is the buttonhole band, and the tricky thing about doing a buttonhole band this way is you have to make sure that as you're knitting vertically these strips, that your buttonholes are going to line up with where you expect the buttons to be. That's something else I talk about in the tutorial. And I was so sad, I was hoping to have the buttons here. I ordered them from this really cool little Etsy shop, and I was hoping they would be here and attached to the sweater, but they're not quite. So here's the sweater without buttons. I'll have to do some final photos of it once I get the buttons attached. But in the meantime, you have these beautiful little safety pins to imagine as buttons on a sweater like this. So that's it. This is the Reverb by Tanis Lovelies, and I think it's going to be absolutely wonderful. I put it on, it's cozy, it fits just perfectly. I was a little bit worried about the chest circumference because of the cables pulling in and all that gauge stuff that happened. It really worked out well, and the other nice thing about adding the button bands at the end is that I could have made them even wider if I really needed to. If I found that the whole sweater was just a little too small, I could have made those button bands a little bit wider, not hugely wider. You could, I guess. But that could make up for some of the circumference. I didn't end up needing to. They ended up being about the same as what the pattern called for, about 2.5, 3 inches. And I'm pretty happy with that. And yeah, so it's worked out well. And I'm pretty psyched. And I can't wait to actually get some photos of it and show it to you guys while I'm wearing it. Yeah. So if you have those old patterns in your Ravelry queue or in your favorites that you favorited a long time ago that you thought were out of your league, they're great candidates for our make-along. And I am going to be drawing prizes for that make-along at our midpoint here pretty quick. So get your FOs up on the thread, and maybe I'll do a draw for a prize for next episode. That could be fun, a couple weeks, so plan ahead. 2 more little segments today. One is that I have a test knit for Shorn, and Shorn is the latest farm to skein yarn. This is Shorn III. It's a fingering weight yarn, Corriedale Teeswater cross, so it has lots of properties of the medium wool Corriedale, but a little bit of the luster of a longer wool with the Teeswater in there. It's a really gorgeous yarn, and I put a call for designers out a while back, and as you guys know who have been over on the Ravelry thread, we have a test knit going on for some beautiful socks and mittens by Amy Engelbrecht Wiggins. And the other designer that I was able to choose for this particular project was Lori Lamont. And Lori has designed a beautiful squishy cable hat. And I'm going to be knitting it during the test knit, and I want to invite you guys to be test knitters if you're interested. I've set up a Ravelry thread over in our group. So if you're interested in the test knit, we have a limited number of spots available, and you can go over to the Ravelry group and put your name in the thread there, and Lori will get in touch with you directly. You can also always email me at knittingthestash@gmail.com, and I'll put you in touch with Lori if you're not on Ravelry, or if you just prefer to get in touch with me directly, that's absolutely fine. We'd love to have you in the test knit. It is a gorgeous hat, and I will put up pictures in here so that you can see it. It has tassels, which I absolutely love, and this really squishy kind of cable-y pattern, all over cable pattern. So yeah, it's going to be a great test knit. I'm going to be in on this one, and I'm really looking forward to it, so I hope that you'll have a chance to join us. And last but certainly not least, I have the winners from the yarn extravaganza of the 100th episode for the giveaway. So I picked 3 winners. The first was Sue Sitko, and the second was Debbie Gogling, and the third was Kitten, W-A-W, Kitten with a Whiplash. And so the 3 of you guys, I will be surprising you with some yarny prizes in the post. And unfortunately our printer wasn't working, so I had everything ready to go, but it wouldn't print the postal thing. So anyway, I'm gonna have to make my way over to the post office and get these in the post to you guys this week. Should be fun. Congratulations to you all, and thanks so much for all of you who entered the giveaway. It was fun to read about all your summer hopes and dreams and plans, and it just gave me a little bit of hope at this time in the pandemic when we've all been, I don't know, a little cooped up, a little bit isolated for the last, year and a little bit. So keep those hopes high, and I'm wishing you all well, and I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. And if you're in the US and you're celebrating Mother's Day, happy Mother's Day to you. Yeah, so I will see you guys in the next episode. Take good care. Bye-bye. Hi. Hi.
I don't know how you do all this with these dogs working.
Hi. Sometimes I teach with them when they're doing this.
All right, so...
Okay, lay down.
Hi, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 109,000 of my knitting podcast, where I talk about yarn, more yarn, and how to find yarn.